The world felt solid and unshakable, a fortress of certainty built upon the foundations of the era of false security. Everything seemed perfect. People walked the streets of the great metropolis with an innate sense of entitlement to their peace. Neon lights flickered over glass towers, masking the rot festering beneath the surface. It was an era of collective denial, where the masses believed the systems built to protect them were infallible. The digital age brought a veneer of transparency, yet the shadows in the city of lights had never been deeper. This was the deceptive calm before a storm that would strip away the innocence of a generation, a time when the hum of progress drowned out the whispers of collapse. The illusion shattered at the Grand Opera House. It wasn't merely a murder. It was a macabre performance. The victim, a billionaire philanthropist, was found suspended from the gilded proscenium arch. The brutality was surgical and cold, possessing a logical quality that terrified the first responders. There were no signs of a struggle. Instead, the body was posed with mechanical precision, draped in silks that mocked the victim's stature. Local logic suggested a crime of passion, but the theatrical spectacle defied every standard criminal profile. The city's heart skipped a beat as the first crack appeared in their gilded cage. Into this darkness stepped Detective Elias Thorne. A man defined by the sharp lines of his suits and the unwavering order of his files, Thorne was obsessed with structure. He didn't just solve crimes, he categorized the chaos. At the opera house, the scent of expensive perfume mingled with the metallic tang of copper. His eyes, sharp from years of witnessing the unthinkable, missed nothing. He was the city's finest, yet this case felt curated. It was as if someone had constructed a labyrinth specifically to test the integrity of his mind, a game designed to break the man who believed everything had its place. As days passed, the violence continued. 2 more figures fell, a judge and a media mogul. Each death was a masterpiece of theatrical horror, staged in institutions they represented. Elias saw the threads connecting these tragedies. These weren't random acts. They were symbolic executions aimed at the pillars of society. The killer was targeting the architects of the status quo, turning symbols of power into tombs. The murders followed a rhythmic progression, suggesting a design that transcended homicide. The city of lights was being dimmed, one pillar at a time, by a strategist who understood symbolism better than the law. The media frenzy was instantaneous. News anchors spoke in panicked tones, while the public retreated behind bolted doors. The once vibrant night markets fell silent, replaced by the heavy boots of security patrols. Trust, the glue holding the metropolis together, began to dissolve. Neighbors looked at neighbors with suspicion, and government reassurances sounded hollow against the killer's growing legend. The city was transforming into a fortress of fear, a place where the lights only served to cast longer shadows. At the third crime scene, Elias found the first piece of the puzzle. Beneath the floorboards lay a small, intricate gear made of an unknown alloy. It was a mechanical component handcrafted with sophistication that suggested resources far beyond a common criminal. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Elias held the cold metal, feeling the weight of a conspiracy that reached into the stratosphere of power. The final blow came at Elias's residence. Returning late, he found his door unlocked. There was no struggle, only an envelope on his desk. Inside was a photograph of Elias, taken from inside his own bedroom, with a note. "The order you love is a lie, detective. Watch me tear it down." The realization chilled him. The law was no longer the hunter. The law was the prey. He was no longer safe in his own home, and the game had truly begun for them all. The International Summit of Progress was supposed to be a fortress of diplomacy, but it became a slaughterhouse of ideologies. While the world's most powerful leaders gathered under the domed glass of the Zenith Pavilion, the killer transitioned from the shadows into a blinding, horrific spotlight. This wasn't a whisper in a dark alley anymore. It was a scream in the halls of power. 3 delegates were found seated at the banquet table, their bodies posed in a grotesque parody of a peace treaty. their lifeblood staining the white linen like a new violent map of a broken world. Panic rippled through the upper echelons of the City of Lights. The response from the government was swift and suffocating. Orders came down from the highest offices to classify the deaths as sudden medical failures, a desperate and transparent attempt to prevent a global market collapse and widespread hysteria. For Elias Thorne, this directive was a jagged blade against his soul. He stood in the commissioner's office, the air thick with deceit, as he was told to bury the mechanical gear he had found at the previous scene. The rift between his duty to the truth and his obedience to the badge began to tear him apart, threatening his professional ruin. The obsession consumed him. Elias's apartment, once a sanctuary of minimalist order and quiet reflection, became a frantic museum of the macabre. Maps were pinned to the walls, connected by spiderwebs of red string that mirrored the broken veins in his bloodshot eyes. He realized the killer wasn't just watching him. The killer was reflecting him, mimicking him. Envelopes arrived daily, containing details of Elias's failed marriage, his childhood fears, and the exact moment his faith in justice had first flickered years ago. Every secret he had buried was being unearthed and mailed back to him, piece by agonizing piece. The emotional weight was a physical gravity, pulling him into a dark abyss of paranoia. It was during a late-night review of the security footage from the summit that the most devastating blow landed. He watched as a figure moved through the high-security zone with impossible ease, bypassed the encrypted locks, and handed a small package to the killer's courier. The figure turned toward the camera for a fleeting second, and Elias's heart stopped. It was his mentor, the man who had taught him everything about the law, the partner he trusted more than himself. His mentor wasn't just failing to catch the killer, he was actively erasing the trail to protect a shadowy organization that pulled the strings of the city's elite. The betrayal felt like a terminal illness. When Elias confronted his partner in the rain-slicked parking garage of the precinct, there were no excuses, only a cold, pragmatical confession. His mentor spoke of the greater good and the necessity of maintaining the illusion of stability, even if it meant letting monsters run free to serve a higher purpose. This revelation shifted the entire axis of the investigation. The killings weren't the senseless acts of a madman, they were a deliberate cleansing. The killer sought to decapitate the corrupt leadership, not to create a vacuum, but to spark a global revolution that would burn the old structures to the ground. The motive was a scorched earth policy for the soul of humanity. Elias realized he was being used as the primary witness to this violent rebirth. As the mentor fled into the night, leaving Elias alone in the downpour, the killer's manifestos were leaked simultaneously to every major news outlet and social media platform. The documents were masterfully written, detailing the hidden crimes of the victims, the judge's bribes, the mogul's exploitation, and the leader's lies. The narrative of the dark killings shifted overnight from a tragedy to a reckoning. The city didn't just break, it transformed. Riots erupted not out of fear, but out of a dark, vengeful joy. The murderer became a dark folk hero for the oppressed. People took to the streets wearing masks that mimicked the intricate mechanical patterns Elias had found at the crime scenes. The metropolis echoed with the sounds of shattered glass and the rhythmic chanting of the killer's slogans. The descent into chaos was total. The authorities, crippled by their own corruption and the public's sudden defiance, lost control of the narrative and the streets. Elias, now hunted by the organization he had served, retreated into the city's underground. He moved through the damp, echoing tunnels, a ghost in a crumbling machine. In a forgotten maintenance room beneath the central bank, he discovered a final blueprint left behind by the antagonist. It wasn't a diagram of a person or a building. It was a schematic of the global exchange hub, the foundation of the world's economy. The countdown was already live on a flickering monitor, its red numbers pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. The killer was no longer satisfied with blood. He was going for the very lifeblood of civilization itself. The next strike would not just kill a man, it would kill the concept of trade and the existing world order. Elias looked at the timer, his reflection pale in the glass, knowing that the real nightmare was only seconds away from its final act. Elias Thorne moved like a shadow through the damp veins of a dying city. The silver badge in his pocket felt like lead, a heavy reminder of a life he no longer possessed. He was now a man without a country, hunted by the very colleagues who had once shared his coffee and his secrets. Above ground, the City of Lights was burning, lit by the fires of a revolution he had inadvertently helped document. The shadowy organization his mentor protected had scrubbed Elias's record, turning him into the primary suspect for the dark killings. He was the perfect scapegoat, the obsessed detective who had finally snapped under the weight of his own case. He emerged from the steam-filled vents near the base of the Great Spire, an ancient stone monument that stood as a silent witness to centuries of human greed. The killer hadn't chosen the financial hub for the final act. He had chosen the heart of history. The countdown Elias had seen in the underground was synced to the Spire's electronic clock, which now controlled the synchronized trading pulses of the global market. As Elias ascended the winding stone stairs, his lungs burned and his vision blurred. He found the killer standing on the observation deck, framed by the cold, biting wind of the high altitude. There was no mask this time. The man who had orchestrated the theatrical killings looked surprisingly ordinary, his face etched with a profound, weary sadness rather than the madness Elias had expected. As they stood face to face, the killer didn't raise a weapon. Instead, he spoke of a childhood spent in the shadows of the elite, of a family destroyed by the very laws Elias had spent his life enforcing. He was a product of the system's cruelty, a mirror held up to the corruption that the city's facade tried to hide. "I am not the monster, detective," he whispered over the roar of the wind. "I am simply the fever that tries to break the infection." The dilemma was a jagged edge in Elias's mind. To stop the killer meant preserving the reign of the corrupt men who had betrayed him. To let the clock strike zero meant plunging the world into a darkness that would claim millions of innocent lives in the ensuing economic collapse. It was a choice between a poisoned peace and a violent rebirth. The killer pointed to the terminal rigged to the Spire's transmission array. One touch stops the reset, and the lies continue. One moment of silence, and we start again from the ashes. Elias realized there was a third path, one that required a price only he could pay. With the precision of a man who had spent his life studying patterns, he bypassed the killer's primary trigger and accessed the internal server of the Shadow Organization through the Spire's encrypted link. He wasn't just stopping a bomb, he was opening the floodgates. He initiated a global broadcast of every piece of evidence he had gathered, the names, the accounts, and the recordings of his mentor's betrayal. To ensure the transmission completed before the organization could engage a kill switch, he had to manually override the security protocols from within the tower's high-voltage core. The resulting surge was a blinding white light that tore through the spire. The transmission went live, a digital wildfire that no government could extinguish. As the truth began to rain down on the screens of every citizen, the old world order began its final, agonizing gasp. Elias slumped against the cold stone, his body broken, but his mind finally at peace. The dark killings had indeed changed the world forever. The aftermath was a decade of upheaval, the collapse of major regimes, the birth of radical transparency laws, and the permanent loss of the collective innocence that had defined the era of false security. Years later, the City of Lights has a different glow. The shadows are still there, but they are no longer ignored or hidden by the elite. Elias Thorne, a ghost of the old world, looks out over a skyline that is no longer built on secrets. He wonders if the price, the lives lost, the chaos endured, was truly worth the clarity they gained. The world is harder now, more honest, and infinitely more fragile. But as the sun rises over the Great Spire, he knows that the darkness finally has a name, and it can never be hidden from the light again.